Halfway through Love Me Tender, Elvis stopped. The band froze. Thousands of fans watched him lean forward, head tilted, searching the crowd. In the dim light, a boy no older than 10 stood clutching a cardboard sign, his voice carrying over the silence. If you believe music can change a life in a single night, stay with me, because what happened next is one of the most unforgettable moments in Elvis Presley's career. The first notes of Love Me Tender floated across the Civic Arena, warm and familiar. Midnight, a Friday night in the South. The air inside was thick, not just with the smell of cologne and hairspray, but with the anticipation only an Elvis concert could bring. The brass caught the light. The bass thumped low. Thousands of fans swayed and sang along. Then, it happened. The drums stopped. The guitars fell silent. Elvis, the king himself, lowered his microphone. His free hand came up, shielding his eyes from the harsh white spotlight. He tilted his head, scanning the front rows like he was listening for something the rest of us couldn't hear. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This wasn't part of the show. From the stillness came a sound so small you might have missed it. A voice, high, thin, and trembling, yet cutting through the silence like a clear bell. It was a boy, no older than 10, his hair slightly mussed, cheeks pale under the stage lights. In his hands, a cardboard sign. The letters, hand-drawn in thick marker, wavered under the strain of his small arms holding it up. Some in the audience would later say it read, "I'm an orphan. Love Me Tender is Mom's song." Beside him, an usher knelt, one hand steadying the boy's shoulder, the other checking the small oxygen tank at his feet. A clear plastic line ran up to his nose, glinting each time the lights swept over it. Elvis took a single step forward. The band froze, eyes on him. You could feel the arena leaning in, thousands holding their breath. The boy didn't stop singing. His voice shook on the low notes, but he pushed on, word after word, note after note. In the upper seats, fans craned their necks to see what was happening. Camera flashes sparked in quick bursts. Elvis's gaze locked on the boy. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite a frown. He adjusted the mic stand down a notch, as if he was preparing to speak, but didn't. Instead, he nodded slowly, like a man who's just made a decision. The decision that would change the course of the night. Somewhere in the shadows of the stage, a crew member took a step forward, unsure whether to intervene, but Elvis lifted a hand, subtle but firm, and the man froze in place. He was still staring at the boy. The crowd didn't know it yet, but they were seconds away from witnessing something that no one there would ever forget. And before this song was over, Elvis Presley would break one of his own unspoken rules. "Spotlight," Elvis said softly, pointing down toward the front row. The lighting operator hesitated, then obeyed. The harsh white beam over Elvis dimmed, and a second light rolled out over the crowd, cutting through the dark until it landed on the boy. Gasps rose like a single breath. In the sudden focus, the boy blinked, his small frame shrinking slightly under the weight of thousands of eyes. The cardboard sign trembled in his hands. Elvis stepped to the edge of the stage. The creak of the floorboards was picked up faintly through the stage mic. His white jumpsuit caught the remaining light, rhinestones throwing pinpoints of color across the nearby fans. He crouched. "Keep singing," Elvis said, barely above a whisper, but it carried to the first rows. A murmur swept through the audience. The boy's voice cracked on the next line. His eyes stayed locked on Elvis, wide and uncertain. The band, sensing the moment, dropped their volume to near silence. Even the steady hiss of the amps seemed to fade. Elvis tilted his head toward James Burton, his lead guitarist. With the smallest nod, Elvis signaled for a soft guitar undercurrent. The first gentle chords of Love Me Tender bloomed again, slow and low. And then, without any build-up or introduction, Elvis began to sing, not alone but with the boy. The duet was imperfect. The boy's pitch wavered. Elvis adjusted instantly, his voice sliding under and around the child's like a protective arm. The sound filled the arena, not polished but raw. A woman in the third row pressed both hands to her mouth, tears streaking her cheek. Somewhere in the balcony, a man lowered his camera and just listened. Elvis leaned forward until their faces were barely a foot apart. "That's it," he murmured during a bar's rest. "Just like that." The boy's voice grew steadier, emboldened by the presence in front of him. The spotlight made the oxygen tube glow faintly as it ran down his cheek and over his ear. The sign had slipped to his side now, dangling from his fingertips. From the far side of the arena, you could see people turning to each other, as if to confirm they were really witnessing them. When they reached the final line of the stanza, Elvis let the last note ring in the boy's voice alone. It quivered in the air for a moment, then faded into a silence, so complete you could hear the distant whir of the overhead fans. Elvis didn't break eye contact. The crowd didn't know whether to clap yet, and then Elvis stood, took one step back, and did something that would send the arena into an uproar. The moment Elvis straightened, he extended a hand toward the boy. Security hesitated, then moved. 2 guards slipped past the front row, careful not to tug the oxygen line as they guided the child forward. His sneakers scuffed against the floor, the faint squeak amplified by the arena's hush. When they reached the stage, the boy looked up. Elvis nodded, and with a small lift from the guards, the child was standing beside him under the hot stage lights. The oxygen tube trailed behind like a pale ribbon, catching flashes of red and blue from the spotlights. In the boy's left hand, the cardboard sign hung limp. His right hand clutched the hem of Elvis's sleeve, not as a fan, but like someone holding onto solid ground. Elvis knelt so their eyes were level. "You ready?" he asked quietly. The boy nodded. The band eased back into the melody, this time so soft you could hear Elvis's leather boots shift against the stage. Together, they sang the final stanza, Elvis steady and deep, the boy's voice carrying a tremor that only made the harmony more human. On the last note, Elvis didn't move right away. He reached into the pocket sewn into his jumpsuit side seam and pulled out a long cream silk scarf. With both hands, he draped it gently around the boy's shoulder. The crowd's reaction was instant, a rolling wave of applause that began in the back and surged forward like thunder. "This one's for your mama," Elvis said into the mic, his voice breaking just enough for the first rows to hear it. The boy's lips parted. He glanced toward the audience, where some stood with their hands over their hearts, others wiping their eyes. Flashbulbs fired, freezing the moment into hundreds of tiny frames. A stagehand in the wings wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, pretending to adjust a cape. Elvis stood, placing a steadying hand on the boy's shoulder as they both faced the audience. For a few seconds the noise was deafening. Cheers, clapping, whistles, all folding into a single sound. But then Elvis bent down, speaking just to the boy. His words didn't reach the microphone. Only the first few rows caught them. Whatever he said made the boy's eyes widen, then blink rapidly as if fighting back tears. The two stood there in the middle of the stage, the biggest star in the world and a small boy with an oxygen line, connected by something no camera could fully capture. And though the crowd didn't know it, Elvis's next move would be even more personal. Elvis didn't turn away immediately. He stayed beside the boy, one hand still resting lightly on his shoulder. The applause began to taper into pockets of softer clapping, replaced by a low murmur as the audience waited for what might happen next. Then, with no rush, Elvis bent down again. His voice was low enough that it was meant for the boy alone, but witnesses later recalled hearing fragments. "You ever need me," he said, "you come find me." The boy nodded once, quickly like he understood the weight of the promise. Elvis straightened and began to walk him toward the edge of the stage. Their pace was slow. The boy's small hand stayed wrapped around two of Elvis's fingers, swinging slightly with each step. The oxygen tube followed like a quiet shadow. At the lip of the stage, a security guard reached. Elvis didn't hand the boy off right away. Instead, he crouched one more time, said something else too soft for the mic, and gave a light pat on the scarf now draped over the boy's chest. Only then did he let go. The boy was lowered gently into the aisle. An usher stepped in to guide him, but the child kept glancing back toward the stage as he was led down the side toward the wings. Elvis turned back to the mic. He didn't address the moment. No explanation. He simply gave the band a small cue. 2 fingers up, and they launched into the next number. An upbeat track meant to pull the room back into motion, but the tone was different now. His voice, always rich, carried a grit it hadn't had at the start of the night. Every sustained note seemed to push a little harder, linger a little longer. From the wings, the boy now sat in a black folding chair. The scarf was still wrapped around his shoulders, his small hands clinging to the fabric like it anchored him. A stagehand crouched beside him, pointing toward the stage. Each time Elvis glanced over mid-song, and Elvis did glance, not long enough to break the flow, but enough to check that the boy was still there, still. The audience couldn't see all of it, but those close enough noticed the exchange. Each glance felt like an unspoken thread tying the performance to that quiet seat in the shadows. The rest of the show rolled forward, but for Elvis, the setlist was no longer the night's center. Something else was coming, and just a week later, far from the roar of the arena, the boy would receive something that would make this moment last forever. 7 days later, the roar of the arena was a memory. The boy was home, in a small bedroom with pale blue walls and a single shelf crowded with paperbacks and cassette tapes. The scarf lay folded on the nightstand beside his bed, where he could see it every time he turned his head. That afternoon, a knock came at the door. His aunt answered, then called for him. On the porch sat a medium-sized package, brown paper wrapped neatly, his name written in thick black ink. No return address, only the postmark from Memphis. His aunt set it on the table. The boy approached slowly, almost afraid to touch it. His hands hovered over the edges before he began tearing away the paper. Inside was a guitar, smaller than a standard model, perfectly sized for him. The wood gleamed honey brown under the kitchen light. Taped to the strings was a white envelope. He slid it open. Inside was a glossy black and white photo. Elvis, mid-performance, looking right into the camera. The signature in blue ink read, "To my friend, Elvis Presley." Beneath it, a single sheet of paper, handwritten in slanted script. "You'll always have a seat in the front row." No flourish, no explanation, just the promise. His aunt covered her mouth with both hands. The boy didn't speak at first. He set the photo down, picked up the guitar, and cradled it against him like he'd been playing his whole life. From the living room, the scarf still rested in plain sight. He reached over, draped it across his lap, and sat that way for a long time, guitar on his knees, scarf in his hands. According to relatives, he slept with the guitar propped beside his bed from that night on. And when he woke the next morning, the first thing he did was run his fingers over the strings, plucking one slow note at a time. The story didn't stay inside the family for long. His aunt told a neighbor, the neighbor told a cousin. Within weeks, Elvis fan clubs were buzzing. Letters began arriving, some from people who had been in the arena that night, others from strangers who'd simply heard the story. They all described the same thing: the way the music had stopped, the hush that had fallen, and the duet no one saw come. In every retelling, the moment grew no less powerful. But for the boy, the magic wasn't in the applause, the scarf, or even the guitar. It was in knowing that someone who could have walked past, who could have kept the show moving, had instead stopped everything to listen. And one final time, Elvis would prove he meant every word of that promise. The boy never sought the spotlight. There were no record deals, no TV interviews, but the guitar stayed with him, its wood darkening slightly with age, the strings replaced carefully whenever they dulled. Every year, on his mother's birthday, he'd take it from its case. The scarf was folded inside, soft from years of careful handling. He would place it over his shoulders, settle the guitar in his lap, and play "Love Me Tender." Neighbors say the sound would drift out the open window, slow, tender, and unpolished. It wasn't about performance, it was remembrance. Some nights he would sit on the porch with the guitar, the scarf still on, watching the street lamps glow against the dark. His aunt once asked why he always played that same song. "Because it's hers," he said simply. The moment in that civic arena became more than just a story in the family. It became proof that even in the middle of roaring fame, a man could stop everything for a single small voice. Friends who visited often asked to see the guitar. He'd let them hold it, but only for a moment, and only if their hands were clean. The scarf, though, never left his possession. Years later, when the boy was grown, a friend found him sitting quietly with the guitar on his lap. He wasn't playing, just running his thumb over the smooth curve of the wood, lost in thought. "You ever think about that night?" the friend asked. "Every time I play," he replied. Some say he kept a copy of the photo on his wall, Elvis's eyes looking straight out at anyone who entered the room. Beneath it, the note in the same envelope, its corners yellowed but the ink still clear. "You'll always have a seat in the front row." It's been told that he took the guitar to a local community center once, teaching a few kids the chords to Love Me Tender. He never said why, but those who were there believed he was passing something forward, the way it had been passed to. Even now, long after both he and Elvis are gone, the story still circulates among fans. At gatherings, people will lower their voices and say, "Did you hear about the boy with the oxygen line?" And they'll tell it again, as if keeping it alive is part of the magic. Because the truth is, the music didn't just stop that night, time stopped. And in that pause, kindness took center stage. Kindness, as it turns out, is the highest note anyone can hit. If this moved you, share it with someone who believes compassion can stop a room. And tell me in the comments, what's the most unforgettable act of kindness you've ever witnessed?